Thank you, Lee. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the OER Sustainability through Capacity Building, Equity, and Research. This is a presentation on the updates from the DOERS3 initiative. Joining me, my name is Kevin Corcoran, and I'm from the Connecticut State College and University System, and I currently serve as the chair for the DOERS Collaborative. Joining me today for this panel is Andrew McKinney from the City University of New York, Dr. Clorinda Phillips from Texas A&M at Corpus Christi, and Dr. James Hallmark from Texas A&M University System. What I'd like to do very briefly is, for those who aren't familiar with the DOERS3 organization or initiative, briefly give a background. So this is a collaborative that was launched in 2018 that was the brainchild of representatives from the University System of Maryland, the State University of New York, and the City University of New York. And what it intended to do was pull public higher ed systems and statewide and province-wide OER initiatives together and leverage the collective will and knowledge and strength to address systematic issues around OER that prevent sustainability and student success. This initiative has worked with other OER networks such as CCC OER's Arlo Group, Spark, Hewlett, and Nash. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the guiding principles, there's a statement of purpose that is linked in this presentation that you can visit. Just in a nutshell, we have 23 different systems across the North America region that represents nearly 6 million students and over 600 and some odd institutions as part of these collective statewide, system-wide initiatives. What we're going to talk about today is I'm going to be asking each one of the chairs that are leading these different initiatives to talk about the work that's being done within a capacity building format, within an equity focused initiative, and what we're doing around research. So with that, I've done it in maybe 2 minutes time. I'm going to ask Andy to start talking about capacity.
Great, thanks, Kevin. My name is Andy McKinney. I'm the OER coordinator at the CUNY Office of Library Services in our central office. And I'm the leader of the capacity building work group. So for the capacity building work group, our primary focus has been sort of trying to help OER initiatives approach persistent problems that prevent growth and sustainability. I'm sure we could all think of many of those, but the ones that we decided on collectively were to figure out ways to improve the listing fulfillment of OER in campus stores, which seems to be a pretty consistent pain point across both the US and Canada, and recognizing OER work in tenure and promotion. Now, I have been to a number of presentations already this week, and I think out of probably the 6 or 7 that I've gone to, at least 4 or 5 of them, there's been somebody in the chat saying tenure and promotion, tenure and promotion. So I do think that's something that has a lot of demand. Next slide, please, Kevin. Thank you. So let's focus on the OER listing and fulfillment first. The purpose of this is sort of to identify and to quantify current challenges. We wanted to figure out, you hear a lot of stuff word of mouth about the problems that are happening, and we wanted to make sure that we could quantify those and have a real sort of actual sort of empirical basis for it, determine the root cause of those challenges, and to initiate change to change those challenges or to make them better. So the process for that has been to put out a survey that had a series of questions that were about what the fulfillment and listing process really looks like on a campus or in a system, what the general policies around that are, what the relationships between, let's say, faculty, our OER coordinators or OER leads, our provosts and and deans and our bookstores really look like, and then what are some common challenges, right? So we got 70+ respondents, most of which, the most popular responses were about challenges were about missing ISBNs, excuse me, only listing a print version when there's an OER digital version available, vague and inconsistent language about availability, sort of similar kind of problem, and really less than ideal reporting coming back to the campus. So after the survey went out, Kevin and Michelle Reed put together a report that has recommendations for creators, institutions, faculty, campus stores, and for their policies and procedures, and campus stores software. So I think it shouldn't be surprising to a lot of people that part of the issue here is that there's a lot of sort of third-party software being used to do this listing fulfillment that's maybe not the most flexible. And so I think a good chunk of that report sort of lights on that as a problem. So next slide, please, Kevin. So the next step for that will be meeting with some important stakeholders, whether those be Follett and Barnes & Noble. Kevin's already met with Campus Stores Canada, and getting their feedback. It's already gone through a number of stages of revision. It's gone through DOERS steering committee, and a number of people in the work group have looked at it, and then finally it needs to go to be distributed. So that, I don't know if Kevin has a timeline for that, but I think we're hoping somewhere in the December or January sort of space for that. Next slide. So moving on to the tenure and promotion problem. So as we all know, I think everyone knows this, recognizing OER work is valuable for tenure and promotion is a persistent conundrum. Part of that conundrum is that tenure and promotion standards vary wildly across types of institutions, whether that be an R1, an R2, a community college, a regional comprehensive, or a private institution. And it could vary between departments or between disciplines, right? So this is it's a hard nut to crack. So what we've attempted to do is to create what we are calling the OER contributions matrix. So Amanda Coolidge and Deepak Shenoy and I have all worked on this pretty intensely. And what we sort of came up with after, we thought of a number of different sort of approaches, sort of model policies, things like that. And what I think we really came to is that less so a top-down approach. What we were really looking for was a bottom-up approach. So what we crafted is a document that has a sort of series of types of OER contributions, and then attempts to fit it into, or recommendations, shall we say, of how to fit it into the tenure promotion process. Next slide, real quick. So this is just a screenshot of one section of it. So we have our contribution, that's to create new OER. After some feedback from faculty and folks on the steering committee, we realized we needed more sort of evidence or examples of what that might look like. So this is stuff that Amanda specifically has worked on. And then we try to say in which of our research, teaching, and service boxes, I know that there are a variety of different boxes that tenure promotion portfolios use, but these are the sort of standard, most common ones. Where does it fit? So we're almost finished. If you could click to the next slide. Thank you, Kevin. We're fleshing out the document with some more examples. We're adapting for specific use cases. I'm particularly working on one for CUNY. And then we're just going to release it because this, again, it's a bottom-up document that we intend for both faculty members and for T&P committees to work with. They're not necessarily, like I said, a top-down thing. So what this is going to need is it's going to need people to take it up and start adapting, right? It's, of course, CC licensed, and get people ready to be using it and to be using it in their particular use cases. I've seen some links, questions. We're not quite finished with it yet, so we're not quite ready for total distribution. We will blast that out to everywhere once we are. All right, and with that, I will hand it over to Clarinda.
Thanks, Andy. I would say the equity work group started with the implicit understanding that achieving equity lies at the heart of OER. Therefore, we wanted to assist post-secondary institutions deepen our engagement by defining equity and unpacking its dimensions. So the key components, well, the overarching goal of the OER equity blueprint is to define, unpack, and explain the multiple dimensions of equity and foreground the role of OER in closing equity gaps. The blueprint has 4 components. There's a theoretical and research foundation so that everyone understands that we are coming at this from a place of theory and research. There will also be a rubric. So there's the equity through OER rubric, case studies, which you are all invited to submit case studies, and we'll get to that in a second. And then lastly, there's an annotated bibliography as a part of the blueprint. Next, please. So when we think about the blueprint, we wanted to begin with sort of a theoretical foundation that acknowledges the scholars and academic leaders that have elevated equity and social justice as essential to the P20 mission. For example, we reference Latson Billings, who reminds us that students' cognitive, cultural, and interdisciplinary diversity should be included in the understanding of equity. The inclusive excellence work by AAC&U insists that we uncover inequities in student success, identify effective educational practice, and then build those practices for sustained institutional change. Sarah Lambert calls on us to use OER for redistributive, recognitive, and representational justice. So in other words, we must act, we must do, and we must help others to act and do to ensure that marginalized and minoritized groups have access to post-secondary learning and degrees. So beyond sort of income inequality or income inequities, we're looking at ability, of course, race, ethnicity, looking at gender, we're looking at access to technology as part of this equity framework. So our values would be that OER is learner-centered. Once again, we must begin with the student. And so as we often hear, we teach students, we don't teach content. And so we enter into this work being learner-centered. We also are very mindful that OER requires us not just to recognize those inequities that exist, but work to redress them. And then I think at the center of all of the work that we're doing is an insistence that equity and quality are inextricably linked. So the blueprint also includes definitions of equity and equity mindedness. Of course, equity mindedness relying heavily on Ben Simone's work. But in terms of equity, we're thinking about equity as a corrective process that reduces opportunity and achievement gaps and through systematic efforts. In other words, we must be very systematic about how we go about addressing the opportunity and achievement gaps. We keep saying that once we've defined it, we can measure it. So once we've defined what equity is and equity mindedness, then we can set out to measure it as it relates to access, participation, persistence, completion, and yes, quality. When it comes to the research foundation, you've heard all week about much of the great research that has occurred within OER. So the emerging body of research that looks at the impact of OER on closing equity gaps, deepening student learning, and improving student success and learning outcomes. The University of Georgia study on how the use of OER decreased DFW rates for Pell eligible students, and Achieving the Dream, which I've heard repeatedly, which found that OER increased course completion rates, improved student learning experiences, and made college more affordable. Next slide. And so after sort of grounding this work in research, theory and research, we wanted to help people do something. We want to help ourselves do something. Being on a college campus, I wanted somehow to figure out how to engage OER better and help the campus do better at adopting OER and making it, I would say, part of the fabric of student success. And so it is the case that using a rubric, the focus is on integrating equity and equity mindedness into OER and mobilize OER to close equity gaps. There is a 5 rating scale of adoption, everything from not present to advanced. And then the rubric dimensions include students, starting with students first, and then practitioners is the second dimension, and the last dimension is leadership and administrators. Next, please. And the rubric is not yet available, but as we all say, it is open. So it's adoptable and it will be adaptable, and we will encourage your feedback and your assistance in making it appropriate for as many users within post-secondary ed as possible. I'm good. Thank you. All right, so here's an example of all of the case studies that have been planned to be part of the blueprint, and you can see the smattering there coming from different types of campuses as well as levels within post-secondary education. Please, we are accepting submissions. If you'd like to be part of this work, if you have a case study going on if you have something that you'd like to share in form of a case study, please do. It doesn't have to be completed. You could be at the very beginning of this work. And it's important that we show people how we can do OER better. And with that, I'm turning it over to James.
Thank you, Clorinda. I've been coordinating the research work group within DOERS, and we have a couple of different projects we're working on, and I'm going to focus on only one of those today, and that is what we've been referring to as our research agenda. The purpose of focusing on a research agenda is to really kind of twofold. One is to shift the focus from the established understanding of cost savings, and there's been a good bit of research on that has already been an established line. Shift it more toward a learning outcomes approach and also an equity approach embedded within that. So it's how or does OER impact learning outcomes and for whom, as it indicates there on the screen. So that's one of the main purposes of what we're looking at here is a shift of, or at least a foundation whereby we can have some good research move forward on this particular focus. The second primary push has been to establish some data standards that allow us to aggregate research centered on that question of how can teaching and learning practices afforded by OER be employed to most improve student learning outcomes. And by creating some data standards, what our intention is to be able to reach out to systems and universities, primarily systems, to be able to pull large-scale data, bring it into a single location that will allow researchers to access that data and be able to do some pretty amazing things with a rather extensive data set. So that's been the primary focus of the research work group in the last few months. If you go on to the next slide, you begin to see some of the variables that we put into this. And frankly, it's not, this is not exactly brain surgery when you're looking at these particular variables, kind of some obvious stuff there. But one of the more important things that we've talked quite a bit about is how we will define that it is OER and how finally we define what is OER and what is not, the different components of OER, for example. And it's all of this is a work in progress. The equity group, the tenure promotion, the bookstores, etc. All of this is a work in progress. But our current approach really is just to say, is it OER or not? And if it is, then it's a 1. If it isn't, a 0. So it just in terms of a simple toggle approach to whether or not this particular class was OER, and then what are the learning outcomes that come from that. But you've got course completion grades, term over term persistence. So are they coming back the following semester? Time to degree, enrollment intensity. So how many credits are they enrolled in? Impacts on students outside of the classroom. I think that's an important component in terms of housing and food insecurity, medical care. Simply the fact that a student is not able to purchase books because they need food, or conversely, they go without food because they need to purchase the book. So this is an issue that we're all very well aware of. And engagement is an additional important piece in this, and that is how and is the student engaging with the material that the faculty have adapted. You go on to the next slide, you see some additional variables there, and I want to jump to that bullet of teaching and learning practices, creating, modifying, using. And so these are the 4 areas that we're narrowing in on here, and that we're wanting to make them more culturally relevant for local students, providing more feedback to students, creating diversity of voices, perspectives, more explicitly encourage and support students to seek help, such that this is the focus of the research more so, and the impact of this on student learning than we might otherwise be looking at in terms of dollars saved in a particular class. So what we are ultimately doing then is finalizing this research matrix. We're at the stage now where we will be creating a toolkit that enables the institutions to upload data, and we've got a central repository where we'll be storing that data. And I would expect that in the spring, you'd begin to see, if you're in a position at your institution, to see where we are requesting that data to be sent to a central repository. And then once there's the requisite cleanup from that, be able to move to that next stage of being able to disseminate to people that this data is available, get your postdocs in there, get your doctoral students working on it, get you in there to begin to mine that data for the different research questions you may have. And so that's been the primary focus of the research work group to date. And with that, it looks like we have about 4 minutes remaining, and I would open it up to any questions that anybody may have on any of these 3 presentations.
Thank you, James. Folks, if you want to use the chat, if you have something that you want to unmute for, feel free. I think Andy has been doing an excellent job in maintaining the chat room. So I think we've been covering those questions, but feel free to respond via chat or on mic. And as we're waiting for questions to come in, I will take this opportunity to thank James, Clarinda, and Andrew for their presentations today. I'm going to take it that it's stunned silence that you 3 did such a tremendous job, that they're in information overload.
So it did look like there's a lot of questions, really good questions in the chat, and those have all been answered. So if there's no more questions at this time, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.
Yeah, let me just, for 1 second, just say what I was answering. So just in case no one's
Sure,
scrolling
yeah.
the letters on the phone. A lot of questions about when things will be released. Not right now. Now everything's sort of still in the revision process. Perhaps we are committing perfect is the enemy of the good, or whatever that saying is. But be assured that once it's done, they will get blasted to every single listserv. There will be, like Kevin said, on DOERS3.org, and they'll be ready and available. So.
Right. So the website is where every final product will be linked from. We will also have a Twitter account, which I linked, which was at DOERS3.org. And there's also a LinkedIn account on top of all of the listserv blasts that we'll have. And we will provide access to these slides. Thank you, everybody.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.